Welcome, everyone, to Get Real, How False News Impacts Elections. It is an event of the 8th Annual U.S. Media Literacy Week. My name is Michelle Chula-Lipkin, and I am the Executive Director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education. We call ourselves Namely. We are the largest membership organization for media literacy around the globe. We are also the hosts of U.S. Media Literacy Week. And the mission of Media Literacy Week is to highlight the power of media literacy education and its essential role in education all across the country. U.S. Media Literacy Week calls attention to media literacy education by bringing together hundreds of partners for events and activities around the country. We are so happy to host this webinar with the National Association of State Election Directors. NASID and Namely have been working together for most of the last year, and it's in a partnership I am very honored to be a part of. NASID members are an incredible group of people working hard every single day to keep our elections safe and secure. And since 2016, they have been asked to become cybersecurity experts, physical security experts, and disinformation experts, all while trust in elections decreases. We hope this conversation gives you some insights into the challenges that election directors face, specifically with disinformation, I should say. And I really can't imagine anything more important right now than doing all we can do to counter false information about elections. Our democracy truly depends on it. So let me introduce our guests tonight, Amy Cohen, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of State Election Directors. Amy previously spent 4 years with Pew Charitable Trust, where she managed the Voting Information Project, guided national research projects, and forged relationships throughout the corporate and nonprofit sector. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Washington University in St. Louis and a Master's of Public Policy from Georgetown University. Amy will be interviewed tonight by Sonal Prakash, a sophomore at George Mason University, who is pursuing a degree and career in film and media. Sonal has been a student reporter with PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs since high school and has experience in podcasting, writing, editing, and video production. I'm super excited to listen into this conversation, so let's get started. I'll pass it off to you, Sonal, and I'll see you guys soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Michelle. So, hi, Amy. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. So to start, can you just tell us a little bit? I know Michelle gave us a short introduction, but can you tell us a little bit about your work and what you've been doing recently and what's coming up for you?
Sure. So I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of State Election Directors, or NASED. In the 40 states where a Secretary of State or Lieutenant Governor serves as the Chief Election Official, NASED's member works for the Chief Election Official. And then in the other 10 states, DC, and the 5 US territories, NASED's member is the Chief Election Official. And across the board, NASED members are the public servants in every state and territory who implement new policies, technologies, laws, work with local election officials, and do things like that. So it's I represent a very diverse group. I like to say American Samoa and Guam to California and Texas, and quite literally everyone in between. But it's obviously our busy season right now. Frankly, we haven't had much of a slow season at all in the last couple of years. But our members are, across the country working with their local election officials, making sure that everyone will be able to cast their ballot who is registered and eligible to do so. So it's a very exciting time for us. And, I'm very excited to be talking to you because among many other things, not to, spoiler alert, but you're a first-time voter. And I think that's so exciting. And I feel like it's such a privilege to get to talk to you about elections, and I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad to be here too, and I'm getting an even bigger privilege to get to talk to you. I can imagine that this year there's going to be a lot of challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of challenges that state election officials are going to be having to navigate, specifically about misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation?
Yeah, the thing with false information, especially about elections, is that it's really permeating every single piece of elections. So there's no part of what election officials do at either the state level or at the local level, because elections in America are extremely decentralized, and the sort of boots on the ground who hires your poll workers and things like that. That's all happening from local election officials, and there are about 10,000 local election jurisdictions in the country. So we're talking very decentralized. But the challenge with false information is that it's touching everything. So we have false information about the people who are actually election officials, right? So it's creating an atmosphere that is more threatening, more antagonistic, and sort of more abusive in a lot of ways for professional election officials. And that is in nearly all cases informed by false information about elections and false information about the people who are part of the administrative process. But then we're seeing false information about the technology, false information about ballots themselves, like the paper itself. We see false information about voting by mail. We're false information about tabulation, which is the actual counting of valid ballots. False information about certification, which is the sort of official determination, this person won, this person lost. So the real challenge with false information here in the election process is just that it is literally touching everything. And it is, driving a lot of questions and interest, which is not a bad thing. Election officials, public servants, we like to think of ourselves as an extremely nerdy bunch. We love to talk about this stuff, but it's really hard when, some of the questions are not coming from a place of not understanding and wanting more information. So they're not coming from a position of being uninformed and wanting to become informed. They are coming from the position of being misinformed and coming from a position of sort of, I saw this, so I know it's true, sort of justify yourselves. And that is also leading to a pretty significant morale challenge in our field as well. So, I think when I talk to my members, what I hear a lot right now is just, they're getting a lot of questions, and some of them are grounded, like I said, in wanting to learn more, and a lot of them are a little bit more antagonistic. But election officials are, we want to answer the questions. We want to be transparent. We want people to see and touch and understand the system, because when you don't have that, when you do have that lack of understanding or that confusion, that's what breeds conspiracy and false information. So we're doing the best we can, but it's also important to remember that election offices are pretty small. So even at the state level, there are some states where there's only 5 people in an election department for an entire state. At the local level, that's even more acute, where we have, I think it's something like 75% of election offices in the country, local election offices in the country, have, I think, fewer than 5 people. A lot of election office staff are part-time, and especially at the local level, they have other responsibilities. So they, handle the tax records and deeds and marriage licenses and dog licenses. And so elections are certainly the most time-consuming, but they have other work that has to be done as well, other services that have to be provided. So it's tough, man. And everyone thinks election officials wake up, a day or two before the election, and they're like, I think I know what I'll do tomorrow. And it's like, oh boy, no, we've been working on this for months, if not years. So it's a hard time for us right now.
Yeah, I can imagine. And especially dealing with something like misinformation that's so hard to root out the cause of and actually figure out where this is coming from, why, stopping it. And I want to know how you guys are kind of trying to address this, and what do election officials actually need in order to be able to consistently address the problem as it continues.
Yeah, so one of the big shifts that we've seen in our field since 2020 has been the recognition that election officials have to be out there telling their story. Because if election officials aren't telling their story, someone else is telling their story for them. And you don't know that the information provided by someone who is not an election official is accurate, right? The best and most accurate and reliable source for information about elections is your election official. And it sounds silly to say that's the lesson learned from 2020, but a lot of election offices have historically taken a position that sort of voter education efforts or get out the vote efforts are not their responsibility. And what we've, like I said, what we've seen is that there's a real shift away from that. And so we're seeing a movement towards greater public engagement in terms of events. I have members who have traveled around their entire states, every county or every local jurisdiction, and done sort of open house events with any group, any person who wants to ask questions. I know secretaries of state and other chief election officials have done the same to try to bring information to people who, might not seek out their election official on the internet or something like that. We're also seeing election officials do sort of more robust digital education efforts. So social media campaigns, things like FAQ pages on websites, or what are they? Rumor control, fact versus fiction. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, rolled out something called rumor control in 2020 to address sort of rumors as they popped up and respond with facts and links to more information. And we've seen a lot of states take that model and apply it to their own jurisdictions. But it's really, really hard. Dealing with false information is a little bit like standing in front of a fire hose with a teacup and hoping you can get everything right. It's just, there's so much content out there. And, I'm not a media literacy expert, and I've been really fortunate over the last year or so to be working with namely, and I've learned a lot. And one of the things that I've thought a lot about and have learned a lot about is this implicit truth bias, right? If you only correct some of the things that are on the internet, then the things that you don't correct seem true. And nowhere is that, I think, more evident than social media, right? Because it would be more than a full-time job for someone to just correct everything that is coming out just about elections for just one state. That's like multiple people's full-time job, and also sounds like an absolute nightmare. And helping election officials understand that, like, it's just not realistic for us to be able to correct and address every individual piece of misinformation. You really need to be driving people back to your website. That's where you can say all that you want to say and as many words as you want. No character count on a website, right? That's been, I think, something that we're working towards, as well as like helping people understand that, like, social media is a tool. It is not the only tool. So, in terms of resources, it's, no election official, or very few election officials, I think, would ever say that they have everything that they need. But I also like to say that election officials are sort of the original Tim Gunn, right? They will make it work no matter what. And so we're seeing like a lot of creative solutions to some of these issues, partnerships with local organizations, partnerships with media outlets, partnerships with like public television, breweries. You know, that's a big one in our field. There's a lot of beer drinkers. So that one's always exciting. But you know, any place where you can put information, and specifically where you can put your website to drive people to more information, because this recognition that we're just never going to be able to fact check the entire internet is hard for election officials. It's a group of people who are so deeply committed to their work that they will, I mean, I have members who will spend 40, 45 minutes on the phone with one person. And that is fantastic. Like I love that about them, but at the same time, that's not scalable to an entire state. You know, so really helping them understand that like you have to invest your time in some of the bigger picture things like your website, getting good information there, because you're just not going to be able to, you know, talk to everyone individually and allay their concerns. I should note that this like innate desire to explain everything about elections is not unique to domestic elections. I was talking to someone who does international observation, and he said, you know, that's at the end of the day, that's what we hear from election officials around the world, is that they just want to talk to people. And if we could just explain just a little bit more, people would get it and they wouldn't be so confused. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I wish that could be possible. But what really can we do on our end? Obviously, it's hard for you to stop, obviously, shutting down all the false information on the internet, but where does the responsibility lie to have an informed electorate? What is within the voters, you know, reach of actions that they can take to make sure that they are informed on their end?
It's a great question. The best thing that voters can do is get their information about elections from election officials. And I understand that there are a lot of, you know, third-party groups that do, you know, run voter registration drives and, you know, do reminders and all kinds of other sort of ancillary tools. But at the end of the day, the best information about elections is going to come from your election officials. And frankly, the only people who can register you to vote, who can, you know, accept and receive your application for a mail ballot, if that's what you want to do, it's only election officials. And I understand the limitations of state and local government websites and things like that. I get it. I'm realistic here. But if you're looking for accurate information, the best place to go is your election officials, because we're talking about an extremely dedicated group of public servants who just want you to understand how the process works. And unfortunately, we work in a field that is extremely detailed, extremely nuanced, and really requires a lot of specificity. And that's just not what, you know, social media in particular is designed for. And unfortunately, that's just not what a lot of these other groups are designed for either. And so I am sympathetic to the cause of some of these groups who, you know, want to help people and want to encourage people to turn out and things like that. But really getting your information from the source is the best way to make sure that you're registered, that you understand where to go, what you need, you know, how to participate. That is the best, absolute best thing. And every single voter can do it. You don't need to know what local jurisdiction you live in, what town or county. You just need to know what state you live in. And that is a pretty easy thing, I think, for most people. And so that is the number one thing that people can do. And then in terms of, you know, being prepared, the best thing that you can do is to be prepared, right? Know what you need when you get when you're going to vote. Know if you need to bring ID. Know if you need to go to a specific location, or if you can go to any location. Do a little bit of work up front, and then you can better ensure that your ballot will be counted as you intend it to be.
Sorry, so it started muting for some reason. Sorry about that.
I thought I
But,
just blew your mind.
I know, I was like, if I was seeing that correctly. But you're talking a lot about how social media isn't the right place for getting all this information, right? We have to go to the real source. Unfortunately, social media is so accessible, it's so distracting, and it's right in front of everybody. It's hard to push them, I think, in the direction of actually approaching, the root of the information and researching themselves and talking to people themselves. But what do you think social media companies themselves can actually be doing, or what should they be doing to actually support election officials?
This is a great and very loaded question. The thing about elections is that people really think about them every 2 years in like October, November, right? That's when people start thinking about it. Maybe you think about it for the primary, but the vast majority of people are really only thinking about November of an even year. And the fact of the matter is that there are thousands of elections every year, even or odd. If it is Tuesday, it is election day. And in some places, if it's Saturday, it's election day. So elections happen year round. And I think that a lot of the social media companies and sort of major platforms are stuck in this mindset of elections only happen every other year in November. And that means that they are not pushing out information on a regular basis. And most of them at this point link directly to state websites, which is great. But so they're not pushing out this information on a regular basis. But also it means that their policies need to be enforced on a consistent basis. You can't just let information and whomever run amok for the vast majority of 21 months and then decide, oh no, we're gonna sort of change the way you can use our platform for a few months and then you can go back to running amok. That's not really fair to anybody, because users expect consistency, and election officials need that support in knowing that these civic integrity policies that the platforms have will be enforced, whether it is October of 2022 or March of 2023. Like, we need to know what's going on, and so I really think that we need to see that shift from the social media platforms in that direction. And some of them have, and unfortunately some of them, and very notably some of them have not. To that end, we also need to see consistent enforcement of the policies, right? So if a voter registration deadline is wrong, that needs to be, and your civic integrity policy says, inaccurate information about dates and deadlines, will be actioned. We need you to do that every time, not just some of the time. And those decisions also need to be made transparently, because election officials need to know what is and isn't happening and what the decision-making process is for false information that is being reported on the platform. And again, users also need to know why their content is being actioned, if it's being actioned. I know there's been a lot about, are the social media companies biased one way or the other politically? And I have no idea. My general takeaway is that they're inconsistent and they're not that great at doing this content moderation. And I don't envy the position that they're in. It's really hard. But if you're gonna do it, you need to do it. You can't sort of tiptoe around the edges and, pick out things here or there, because then you open yourself up to criticism, but also it makes it very difficult for the people whose sort of livelihood is being impacted by the false information that's spreading on these platforms. And then finally, the last thing I'll say, and truly on this particular subject, I could go on forever, but on one of the most interesting shifts I've seen over the last almost 11 years that I've been working in elections is that the platform's civic integrity policies originated from a place of wanting to prevent voter suppression and prevent voters from being disenfranchised because of inaccurate information circulating on these platforms. And that is critically important. But what we're seeing now is that there is so much false information about so many different parts of the civic life and civic participation and voter participation that narrowly focusing your policies on voter suppression and preventing voter suppression, while an extremely important piece of what needs to happen, doesn't protect the entire ecosystem. So, voting is the, I think, big and extremely important way of participating in elections, but so is being a poll worker, so is being a poll watcher, and when policies are written just about voting, you're allowing false information about those other places in the election process to flourish. And when these policies are just written about voting, you're ignoring all of the other places in the election process besides like the different ways of participating. You're ignoring all of the other places in the election process that misinformation and false information have really taken hold. So things like tabulation, right, which is our sort of highfalutin way of saying counting the ballots. That's not voting, but there's a lot of false information about tabulation and what ballots get counted and what don't, and the timing and all that other stuff. And so that is a place where we see misinformation flourish, because I don't think that the civic integrity policies are written in a way that get at that. It's the same thing with certification, which is the official, this person won or lost. There's just a lot of different places in the process for false information to live, and these narrowly written policies don't address those places. And to that end, one of the biggest places that we see false information about elections is on election night and who won and who lost. And the biggest message from election officials is election night results are not official, and the results that you see from in the press are most often from the Associated Press, and those are not official results in that they're not coming from election officials, right? The Associated Press hires thousands of people to literally go stand outside of precincts and collect information. But a lot of media outlets and a lot of social media outlets and platforms don't acknowledge like these results are unofficial. They'll continue to change as results come in from the Associated Press. These results are not from election officials. But again, that's not a place where really the civic integrity policies are designed to sort of live. And so I don't think they address them that well. I probably said way more than you were hoping for.
No, that's all right. I love to hear it. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of these actual integral policies that need to be worked on. Is that something that we can actually expect to see any results of in this year's election? Is that going to take a long time? Kind of in your experience, I know you've been doing this for a long time. How has that scene been changing, and how can we kind of improve this system going towards the future?
Do you mean like the election system, or do you mean like the civic integrity policies? Because I
Both,
got thoughts on
actually.
both.
Yeah, thoughts on both.
You know, for this election, in terms of the civic integrity policies, I don't know that we're going to see anything really substantively different than what we've seen in the past. I would love to be wrong. Certainly I haven't seen any real change, like substantive changes to the policies, though I did appreciate a little bit that Twitter did recently say publicly that they're only enforcing their civic integrity policies for a short period of time before the election and a short period of time after. In 2020, that was not communicated publicly. And so election officials didn't learn that Twitter had stopped enforcing their civic integrity policies until it was published in the press earlier this year. I am grateful that they at least told us what they won't be doing. It'll be interesting. I also think the atmosphere is really fraught. The First Amendment is critical, right? Election officials have devoted their careers to protecting the right to vote, which is, and protecting democracy. And the First Amendment is a critical piece of that. And again, this is a hard thing to do, content moderation, and remain respectful and cognizant of the First Amendment. But I just don't know that we're going to see anything really remarkable in the next couple of weeks. In terms of elections, it's hard to know. Well, elections in 2020 were so different for so many different reasons, but I think the most obvious one is COVID. That was before vaccines. It was before a lot of things had and offices and everything had reopened. So there was a lot of uncertainty. And I know that the pandemic is still going on right now, but we've sort of adjusted, right? And we're all sort of living our lives in this sort of new shaped reality. So the election, I think, will probably look fairly significantly different from 2020, mostly because 2020 was so significantly different from any election that had happened before it. We saw unprecedented levels of people voting by mail. States that had historically had just a handful, not handful, but fewer than 5% of their voters casting ballots by mail were at 40-50% of voters casting their ballots by mail. That's huge. That's huge from the voter side. That's, cataclysmic from the election official side, because it's very different in terms of the process piece. So I think, for voters such as yourself, right, this is your first time. And so I think that, yeah, so I think, this election is going to have a lot more in common with all of the future elections that you're going to vote in, because I am confident that you're going to vote in all of the elections that that come your way. Voting is habit forming, they say.
Of course.
So, I think we'll still see we'll probably see, more people voting by mail, just because a lot of the people who did it in 2020 probably really liked it, because they, and then they learned that they had that available to them. We've seen some states make changes to the way that they administer elections. So now I live here in DC, and now in DC, they mailed everyone a ballot, which is not the way we used to do things. We did it in 2020 because of the pandemic, but it's not how we've done things previously. Other states like Vermont have moved to a full vote by mail model. So, we've seen some law changes in that way, but I think mostly this election will look like the 2018 election in terms of from an administrative perspective. And I think administratively, this will have more in common with 2024 and beyond. So you're getting in here at a nice normal time.
I'm glad.
Yeah, so it's and a lot of states have already started voting. Early voting is very common. So many states are already doing that. I know, Sonal, you're in Virginia, so you have the option to early vote. And actually, I do too. I should probably get on that. So, we also in elections tend to fight the ghost of the last election. So after 2016, we were extremely focused on cybersecurity, not to the detriment of everything else, but it was really a significant shift in the way election officials think about doing their jobs. And the shift after 2020 is what we were talking about at the beginning. It's the shift to doing so much more proactive voter education and really going out of their way to do that kind of effort. And I think we're just going to see that continue to grow.
That's a great thing to hear. I'm glad that, if anything, we're getting more and more voters and not less and less. I know that is probably the biggest worry, to make sure that everyone is actually being able to participate. I know from the perspective of, a young person in college who's always on social media and is very attracted by it. There's so much content, like we were talking about earlier, and it can be really hard to look at everything and not feel apathetic and not feel like you want to just kind of not care about it, just not worry about it. Don't, mess with it if you don't have to. But it's really important. And I hope that more people are able to hear this conversation. And we've talked about both sides, kind of from the side of the election officials and from the voter side. What is missing from this conversation? What do you wish was covered more in the news that people would actually hear about?
I wish that people really understood how much work it is to administer an election. And I mean, I work in elections and I love elections, and I will talk about elections until 3 o'clock in the morning. That would make a very boring article. I'm I get it. But I think people really don't understand the amount of work and training and care that election officials of all stripes put into their work, because they're taking oaths to their state constitutions, to the Constitution of the United States. But even beyond that, like, people who work in this field really care so deeply about doing a good job, that they're constantly training and learning and working to get better. I'm going to use Virginia because I know it pretty well, but also you live there. There are a lot of elections in Virginia. Virginia is one of those states really where, like, every Tuesday it is election day. But election officials don't take the small election where there's only 500 people who are eligible to participate, or 1,000 people who are eligible to participate. They don't take those little itty bitty elections any less seriously than they take, a midterm general or a presidential general. Every single one of those elections is getting the same care and attention to detail. And every single one of them is an opportunity to practice and to learn and to see how you can do things better, so that the next one goes even smoother, and is even more successful. A lot of election officials think of themselves in a customer service industry, right? It's a little bit different. But if somebody has a good experience when they vote, they're more inclined to come back. And so we really do see election officials using all of these opportunities to, work on line management and work on polling place layout and, work on form design or education design, things like that. And I just really wish that people could see how much work really goes into this and how much election officials care about doing a good job, because it's, I know there's a lot of coverage right now of the challenges that election officials are experiencing and the threats and abuse and the morale issue. But I just feel like if people knew how dedicated these professionals were, it's more than just they're your friends and neighbors. It's like they care so much. And if someone has a recommendation for how to make that come across in an article or something that people will read, I would love to hear it, because it just doesn't convey. And when I see my members in person, I'm so proud to work for them, because I just know how much they care. And I encourage people listening and people like yourself to get involved however you can. Voting is a gateway drug, but next time you can be a poll worker, and especially young people, that is a great way to get involved, because when people see people who look like themselves at their voting location, it makes them feel more comfortable. Yeah, it's just a community who cares so much, and really wants to do a good job. And I wish that came across more strongly in a lot of the media coverage, but I also don't totally know how to make that happen.
Right. I can think of very few ways to actually be able to gather everyone's attention to even pay attention to something and make it seem like something they really need to care about. I feel like a lot of people would probably pass up on a subject like this. And I myself didn't even probably a few years ago wouldn't have thought that this system was so complicated and that there were so many people behind it, and that it is so nuanced to work within.
Yeah, it really is.
I'm so glad that we have people like you that are actually able to do this for us.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited, like I said, because you're a first-time voter.
Yeah.
I'm just so excited. If it's okay, I'm curious, like, why is voting important to you? Like, why is it a thing you want to do?
Well, I've always been told, obviously, in school that, you have to vote. It's something that all citizens have to do. And I was like, okay, yeah, it's just like a random, I don't know, like an adult chore. I feel like it always seemed that way. But I feel like once I realized that my place in in this country and everything that all the structure that I'm supported on, and all the privileges I have and things are because of my parents voting and my parents being able to come here as immigrants. I have that kind of perspective. So I know that I want my voice to be heard when I want, to see what my life is going to look like in the future and for my kids. And, I think I always was kind of like trained to think about that, thinking about your lineage and your voice and what kind of like is the mark that you're leaving. And I want to have my voice heard. Like I want to, not that I am at all interested in going into political sciences or becoming a politician myself, but I would like to still help, do my duty as a citizen. And I want to help however I can. And if that is something that is accessible and already even expected of me, then I'd feel more than obligated to help. So I feel more than happy to take part. So I try to use that as a way to encourage people my age to get out and vote, because I know some of the other reasons for voting are a little bit hard to grasp, I think, for younger people. I think the attitude is a little bit more apathetic, definitely, because of, the way that they have actually been receiving information and how they've been, like, their perspective on this.
Yeah, it's one of the great ironies in elections is, the president even Congress, like they suck up all the oxygen, but the candidates on your ballot who have the most impact on your day-to-day are the down ballot candidates. It's your mayor, it's your school board, it's your city council. Those are the people who are figuring out, you know, where the stop signs go, and should we open a new school here, and you know, what are the housing services available, and what other community services are available. And I just think it's hard, right? Like when these big national things, I mean, you know, in many ways, like even Congress, it's not one race, right? There's hundreds of them, but it is like one national event. It sucks up all the oxygen, and I absolutely understand why people feel kind of turned off by that. But I hope, you know, I hope with ambassadors like you, that we can sort of take the information and help them understand that the contests that have the most impact on their lives are actually not the ones getting all of the attention.
Right.
Oh, look,
Hi.
it's Michelle. Hi.
Hi. I just have to say that like I did not anticipate like this conversation make me like teary-eyed. Amy, when you talk about your members, I'm just like, oh my God. And then so now when you're talking about voting, it's just like, this is so beautiful. I don't know whether I'm tired or you guys are just really, really impactful, powerful speakers. Probably a little bit of both.
Happy to
Thank
help.
you. I'm not sure if that all of that is true, but
So now I didn't want to interrupt you though. Do you have any other questions? Because I have some things I can like ask and talk about, but I don't want to interrupt if you have any more.
no, go ahead, please.
Well, I would love, Amy, if it's okay, I'd love to ask Sonal another question.
Yeah.
I'd love to know just in terms, like, so my kids are 18 and 20. So I imagine similar age to you. And they do think about voting. Like my son texted me today. I was so, Amy, you'd be proud that he was like, I have to vote before I go to California because he's going to be in California for election day and we live in New York. And I have to do the same thing because I'm going to be away too. And so it was like, it's in their minds. It's in their minds. And I just wonder, in your experience, your peers, is this on their minds? Like, are they thinking about this? Are they thinking about the election? Do they know you have to be surrounded by other first-time voters, clearly, because of your age? So I just wondered if you had, like, if you were talking about this with the people in your life.
Yeah, well, I obviously am a little bit more involved in these kind of discussions than some of my friends are. So it's a little bit more on my mind, definitely, as can be expected. But I honestly don't see that many people talking about it unless it's brought up or it's something. Usually when I hear people, I think everyone knows it's getting around fall time. We know it's an even year. We know that the elections are coming up. Everybody knows like all the signs, everything changes, right? There's so many signs in our physical world, but I think maybe they get so used to seeing these every year that it's kind of hard. I feel like in this transition period when you're going from a kid to an adult, from someone who's not ever voted before to someone who's voting now, to recognize those things and recognize this change of environment as something that maybe you should look at and be a little bit more in tune to. I think it's hard for young people to kind of get used to thinking like that. But I do know a lot of really amazing people who have gone out of their way, obviously, to help with voting, working at poll stations. And I'm seeing a really big range, honestly, of people who are really apathetic, who honestly have no idea what's going on. They know someone is getting elected, something about the government, something with politics, and I think that's about all they could tell you. And I know other people who are really extremely involved and who are really passionate about it. So I think it's the next challenge is trying to target people and find out how to get their attention as well, which is definitely something I'm trying to do. I'm trying to bring it up as much as possible, saying, hey, have you voted this year? Oh, did you already register yet?
It's interesting because you had said, Amy, maybe, and make sure I didn't misunderstand it, but that you we are seeing growth in numbers of voters,
Yes,
like people that
absolutely.
are engaging. But there's still so many people that don't vote in this country. And it drives me batty. And I just like, is it so like, I'm just wondering from a election official frame of mind, does that enter your mind, like that you're thinking like, wow, it's like almost half the country, not half the country, but a lot of people don't vote? Or
So,
you're so focused on the voters you can't even think about the ones that aren't voting?
so we tend to really focus on the voters, not because we're not interested in the people who aren't registered, but registering to vote is in all states except North Dakota, right? You have to register to vote in order to participate. And that is the sort of, it's the step a voter has to take in order to participate. From the election official side, the list of registered voters informs basically everything that they do. It informs how many ballots you need and how many polling locations you need and how much voting equipment and all this other stuff. And so we tend to focus so much on the details and the minutia in that way, that at least I don't always think so much about the people who are not participating. But I, like Sonal, I was raised in a house where voting is what you did.
Yeah.
And, I have very fond memories of growing up in New England with the really old lever equipment and going in with my mom and flipping the lever. And, Sonal, this like way predates you, but you would flip these levers and then you would pull a giant lever, and the giant lever is what would cast your ballot, and it would also open the curtain. And that was like, and you're done. The curtain has opened. And my mom used to let me like flip the levers, and then she would be like, but you can't pull the big one because that's mine.
Oh my gosh, it's so great.
So I have like very fond memories of the process, and it's so hard for me to understand why people don't see that your vote is your voice and that decisions are made by the people who show up. And I realize I just used two cliches in one sentence, but it makes such a, I never realized that like something happened in my brain that made that so obvious to me. So I feel fortunate that I've been able to devote my career to it, because even as a kid and in college, I loved it. And I thought thought a lot about how important it was, and did a lot of my own research on sort of the process piece, because that's who I was in college. But it just never really entered my mind that not everybody was like me.
I love that. I wanted to just mention the work that we have done together, Amy, our organizations, and specifically the election communications toolkit that we created together. I'm going to try to share my screen. I don't know. I didn't get this pre-approved, so I might break the whole system.
I don't know, man. As an event planner, I frown on that.
I know. I'm sorry, everyone backstage. Okay, so I just wanted to share this election communications toolkit that we did together. We worked super hard on it, including Carson, our amazing namely comms coordinator. There are social media graphics, there are videos, and these materials were created for election officials to be able to have content that would really stress the most important thing that Amy said today, which is if you need information about elections, go to your election officials. And then very pertinent to Media Literacy Week, we created these two versions of tip sheets that can be used in, by election officials, but can also be used by educators, can be used in general public, really like, trying to really instill media literacy skills when you're thinking about and interacting with election information. So super proud of this work that we did together, and the materials are not midterm specific. So we'll continue to push them out and hope that it will continue to be, helpful information for the election officials and their constituents. Amy, I don't know if you want to share any thoughts about the toolkit and just,
So the only thing I'll add is, I mentioned at the beginning that one of the most interesting things for me about the work we've done together, Michelle, is sort of learning about different kinds of bias and repetition bias is a real thing, which is the more you hear something, the more you think it's true. And when Michelle and I were working on these materials, we kept saying these are so repetitive. And then we were like, oh, but wait, that's the point. People who are spreading false information about elections are leveraging repetition bias. They are using the same language over and over and over and over again. And there really is no reason why election officials can't leverage the same principles themselves. And that's really what we were thinking about when we put together these materials. And the fact that, after hours of staring at the social media graphics and the videos, we were like, oh my God, why are they so repetitive? That was exactly the point.
Yeah.
And we had the realization at the same time, like, this is exactly why we're doing this. And so I'm really proud of them. Because again, not only are they leveraging this principle we're using the repetition bias for good here. But what I hear a lot from my members is that especially local election officials don't have the time or the resources to develop social media graphics, videos, things like that, because they cost money. And even if they don't cost money, they cost time. And one resource that election officials cannot get enough of is time. There is never enough of it.
Yeah.
And so it was really important for us to create graphics that were customizable and very easy to customize. So I was saying to someone this morning that the graphics are not only customizable, but we literally made step-by-step instructions for how to do it, including a video, because people send me stuff all the time that I can customize, but they don't tell me how to do it, and I don't have time to learn, and I'm a really small staff. And so if I don't have time to figure it out, neither does a local election official, because I have 6 jobs, they have 12. So it was really important for me to make it as easy as possible, and I think we succeeded, and I have gotten really positive feedback. And then the last point I'll make is that we made everything available in both English and Spanish,
Thank you for saying that.
because we know that false information is spreading in all variety of languages about US elections, and anything that we can do to help make that a little bit easier and help stop the spread just a little bit, I think is helpful. And to that end, I'll also note that NASED has an FAQ page on our website. You can go to www.nased.org. And there's a banner at the top and it will tell you, but our FAQ page is also available in Spanish for exactly that same reason. And I hope that in the future we'll be able to offer more languages as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both so much for this conversation. I always learn more and more and more whenever I hear Amy talk. It was such a pleasure, Sonal, to add, we were even saying backstage, oh my gosh, she's incredible. So we'll be reaching out to you again to participate in more conversations. Thank you both. Thanks everyone for watching. Happy Media Literacy Week, and make sure you vote.
Yes, thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.